I'm Larry Alex Taunton, and I'm host of the Ideas Have Consequences podcast. And I wanted to say a few things about the Tucker Carlson, Vladimir Putin interview. I've been in Russia many times, been in Ukraine many times, wrote a book, A History of Ukrainian Politics and Corruption. A decade ago, before most people could find it on a map. I have degrees in Russian history. Don't claim to be an expert. I'm not sure that there are any experts when it comes to Russian history, when it comes to Russia itself. But point is, I'm no novice to the field. I've studied it both at an academic level and at ground level. And there are a few things that I just want to say as it relates to the Tucker Carlson interview with Vladimir Putin. First of all, there's this monologue by Putin about Russia's history. And, Carlson says at the beginning of the interview, he says that he was a little bit annoyed with it. And that definitely comes off in the interview itself. He keeps interrupting Putin and saying that he doesn't really know why this is particularly relevant. I want to explain to you what's happening here. Putin is giving actually a very accurate portrayal of Russian and Ukrainian history. You see, from a Russian perspective, the two countries, by and large, are one. They have always seen them as one. Now, it fascinates me that all the billions of dollars that have been spent in Washington think tanks, that no one saw this invasion coming. I mean, they really didn't know that this was going to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. In Russian History 101, you learn this at the very beginning, and that is this, that Russia has always claimed Ukraine as utterly vital to its survival for two reasons. One, because it is their access to a warm water port. Without it, they don't have one. Secondly, Ukraine has been Russia's a breadbasket. And there's actually a third reason. It's the one that Putin is laying out in the interview, and that is that the very first Russian state was founded at Kyiv, not in Moscow, not in St. Petersburg, but at Kyiv. It would be like the United States saying that our very first capital was in Ottawa, or was in Havana, or was in Mexico City. And this actually is true. Now, what I think is fascinating in this is that he actually is admitting what Russians frequently deny. He's actually making reference to something called the Primary Chronicle. The Primary Chronicle is Russia's oldest native historical document, and it is one that the Russians have often wanted to deny as accurate because it claims that the very first Russian state wasn't found by Russians. It was founded by Varangians or Normans, or as you know them, as Vikings. That the Russians themselves lacked sufficient organization to rule themselves. And according to the Primary Chronicle, they actually invited the Varangians, the Vikings, to come and rule over them. Now, this is called the Norman theory. The Norman theory, highly controversial in Russia. There have been people sent to Siberia for claiming that the Norman theory is true. Well, here Vladimir Putin is saying that it is true. But he's also saying that Ukraine, our claim to Ukraine isn't unique, it isn't new. And he's a little more specific than that. He's saying not that we have a right to the whole of Ukraine, but to eastern Ukraine. Now, my point here isn't that you should accept that as valid or not. My point is this, that the United States provoked this war with Russia. We knew that we were doing this. The Biden administration, through NATO and the EU, knew exactly what they were doing. They were trying to provoke this war because we are prepared to fight to fight Russia and Putin to the very last Ukrainian. We want to destabilize Putin. That is what the Biden administration is seeking to do. And they're seeking to do it through Ukraine and with Ukrainians. And we did that by inviting Ukraine to join NATO, by destabilizing a duly elected government in Ukraine. My point here isn't that you should support Putin, that Putin himself is right. Putin is corrupt, but he's not a globalist. And that is why the Biden administration, the left, wants to destabilize him, because they're not bothered by his corruption. They're corrupt. They're not bothered by his election rigging. They rig elections. They're bothered by the fact that he isn't on board with the globalist agenda. So when Putin here is making this historical argument and Carlson thinks it doesn't matter, I assure you from Putin's perspective, it does matter, because it is there that their claim resides. He's not saying that we have a right to France. He's saying we have a right to Ukraine. You don't have to believe it, but that's the argument.